When you're first getting started out as a 3D artist, it's pretty easy to make some big mistakes, and some of them can ultimately end up killing your career. So in this video, I'm going to give you 8 of the biggest mistakes that I've seen in my decade-long career, and hopefully I can help you avoid making them. Number 1, refusing to learn and adapt to new technology. Now, before you think I'm going to push you headlong into making AI slop, I'm not, but this is still important. I'm not saying you have to learn every single new piece of tech that comes along, but you should at least try and stay ahead of major developments in the industry. Now, I'm not a huge fan of AI video generation personally. I don't think its capabilities are there yet, and more on that in a coming video, but I don't stop testing its capabilities versus my own as a 3D artist. And the reason for that is it's very easy when something comes along to dismiss it out of hand. And if you do that, and it does get better, and you haven't reassessed yourself every once in a while, it can catch you off guard. But this tip actually has to do more with how you bid contracts or apply for jobs too. When I was still fresh in film school, one of my mentors and thesis advisors gave me a piece of advice that served me very well throughout my career. Bid the job first and then learn the skill. This means you should try and shoot for jobs even when you can't necessarily do them right away, and then learn on the job or ahead of it if you've given yourself a little bit of time. If you follow this, you will not only learn way faster than if you were just applying to stuff within your skill level, but you'll also end up booking higher paying jobs right away, and it can help get you over that initial hump of low paying, bad contracts. And there truly is nothing like having to meet a deadline to light a fire under you to actually learn a skill. But I wouldn't be much of a YouTuber if I didn't take my own advice. So I've partnered with hellorokoko, the motion capture company, and over the next few videos, I'm going to be working hard on creating an original character, something I've never done before, so that I can give myself a face and not just be a disembodied voice anymore. And in the meantime, I've been testing out their motion capture suit, and let me tell you, this thing is, honestly, it's beyond any tech I've ever used before. Here's a little motion test I did just to kind of show the capabilities. You can see right away, it's capable of handling motion far beyond what regular Markerless motion capture can handle. I could get down on one knee, do jumping jacks, turn around, all sorts of stuff that Markerless really struggles with. The suit handles just fine. So in the spirit of this point, and in the spirit of furthering my own career, I'm going to take the plunge into having a virtual character, and we'll cover that more in further videos. But just know, this is a big leap for me, and just like me, if this kind of opportunity presents itself, now I'm not talking about getting a motion capture suit, but if you're considering it, I'm certainly going to say this one is incredible. But if the kind of opportunity to use new technology, sometimes scary new technology, presents itself to you, I think you should take it. Every time I've done this in the past, it's been worth it to make that leap for me. And the last thing you want is to stagnate yourself and get caught out by people who did take that leap. Number 2, ignoring office politics. Office politics suck, and it's tempting in every workplace to just stay out of it altogether. But as the saying goes, if you don't get involved in politics, politics will definitely get involved with you. I'm not saying you have to be the evil, scheming visor of your workplace, but it is good to have a general idea of the ins and outs of your office politics because they can both help you get ahead and also keep you out of trouble. At one of my previous gigs, I knew months in advance that my department was going to get the axe because I had a solid feel for the politics of the place, and I could see that the company was moving in a direction that would make me and my department irrelevant. I was actually able to use that info to negotiate a severance package that gave me enough ramp to start this YouTube channel and reach my first 100,000 subscribers. So in that way, it's already paid off for me in a huge way. Knowing your office's politics isn't some mystical art. You'll get a feel over time, and you can also chat casually with other people in the office and learn a ton. I'm not saying be the office gossip, but the things I tend to pay attention to most are major moves that the company is making, interdepartmental or general dysfunction, and pay. Major company moves are easiest. C-suite tends to telegraph those pretty far ahead of time, and you can generally tell when something isn't going right because they tend to stop talking about whatever that is altogether. Dysfunction can be a bit harder. The best way to spot this is simply by spending time at the company. Eventually, you start to get a feeling for who doesn't like who and how it affects the reporting structure and the projects you're working on. Pay can be the trickiest. Generally, people don't chat about pay, even though it's illegal for a company to prevent you from doing so. And if you make friends at work, generally this is the best way to find out about salaries. I'm not saying you should press for that information because that's uncomfortable, but if you get to know people well enough, eventually it'll come up. And I encourage you to talk about this if you can find a tactful way, since it generally helps everybody involved to negotiate better for themselves. The one exception to this is if you get promoted into a management level position, you absolutely should not under any circumstances be sharing the pay scales of your reports. It's privileged information, you can get in a lot of trouble, and it may even be illegal in some states. My advice for this applies strictly to coworkers, so keep that in mind. If you do all these things, you will generally have a much more relaxed time at a full-time gig or a long-term contract. However, doing this won't save you from a layoff or getting fired for incompetence, but it can give you enough advanced warning that you aren't left picking up the pieces and scrambling to find new work. Number 3, prioritizing your artistic style over art direction requirements. We may work on computers, but we are artists. Over time, most of us develop a unique style or styles that we consider our own. It's something that we spend a lot of time honing and are very proud of. It's actually something that I've struggled with and am still struggling with, but that's a video for another day. All this is to say, developing a style is a huge part of artistic growth. However, it can become an issue in a team environment. If you're working on a visual effects team, video game team, or any other production team with more than one artist, you're going to have an art director or some equivalent reporting structure. The art director will control the implementation of the style of the project you're working on, and that style will not always line up with your style. In a work environment, it's critical to put the team and the production ahead of your own personal artistic tastes. This sounds like common sense, but I have seen artists flame out fighting with and pushing back on art directors because they want the work to be in their style, even though it's not a good match for the overall production. Avoiding this is simple. Use the briefs and references that you're given by your art director, and pay attention to the broader goals of the project. If you can't match your work to the project or are struggling with adapting your style to fit the project, don't be afraid to talk to your team leads or your art director. They can help sit down and hopefully explain the broader style and idea of the project and maybe make some stuff click that hasn't clicked already that will help you get there. And if not, they can help sit with you and basically direct your style and or help you kind of understand the concept better. That's what your team leads are for. Talking with your leads, coworkers, and art director is the number one way you can avoid falling into this trap. Number 4, not making and leveraging connections with your coworkers and managers. I know, it sounds like corpo speak, and in a way it is, but one of the more subtle mistakes that I've seen people make is not leveraging the connections that they have at full-time jobs or at long-term contracts. When you come onto a longer-term job, you may feel that you're there to just punch a clock and make whatever 3D content they've hired you to make. But your workplace is the most valuable place for you to build connections with other people in the 3D industry and even beyond the 3D industry. These are big but also small fields. So what you do at your workplace will get around, and if you do a great job and you're pleasant to work with, other people will hear that. One of my first hires at my last gig was a guy named Mike Hodgetts, who is now running his own company, and I've done gig work with them before I got my current full-time position. It's a big industry, but it's not that big. Essentially, every valuable job I've ever had has come through word of mouth in some form. I'm not saying that you should be the obnoxious coworker who's only interested in networking, but you should at least try to socialize, get to know your coworkers and their history with 3D, and you can learn a ton in the process. And the longer your career in 3D goes on, the more of your work will end up coming from these relationships. Number 5, this is a big one when you're first starting out, and it's only doing freelance work in one economic sector. This can be particularly insidious. When you first get into 3D, you'll often find yourself falling into a niche that you're particularly good at. And depending on what the market's doing, you may get a ton of work in that niche, especially if the demand is really hot at that time. Do not limit yourself to only that niche. It's a gold rush while that segment of the market is exploding, but just like any gold rush, when the mine dries up, the town that was built around it goes bust. I've seen this happen to numerous artists, very talented artists. Most recently, a ton of people pulling consistent work in the supplement industry were both replaced by AI slop and also lost work because that industry in general slowed down. This is not to say you shouldn't max out while a niche is paying out, but it's very important to keep a broad skill set and portfolio so that when that area of the market is played out, you aren't caught totally unprepared. This is especially important when you're first starting out because you haven't yet developed a broad skill set. So if you niche down into something super specific, you will develop a skill set that only serves that niche. And if the niche dries up, you're screwed. Not only will you be looking for work full-time, you'll also be trying to develop an entirely new skill set to find that work and build a portfolio to show people who are offering that work. So my advice is when you're first starting out, even if there's a niche that's paying out, take the occasional job in something else, try and get a nice, broad, well-rounded skill set, and then once you feel really confident in your abilities and your portfolio can show a decent number of things across a fairly wide spectrum, then you can go all in on the niche that's paying out. Number 6, not being self-directed in full-time and contract positions. I want to stress before I explain this one that there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking your team leads or other higher-ups or even your coworkers for help. That said, it's all too common for employees or contractors, especially those newer to 3D in general, to go straight to asking for help rather than try to problem solve on their own first. This issue of having to have something explained exactly step by step or not being able to do it is intergenerational, but anecdotally I've heard it is much more common among Zoomers for some reason. And not just in the 3D industry, I've heard this from people I know in multiple other industries as well. If any of you have theories on why that might be, or you just want to call me a faillennial boomer, please feel free to do so in the comments. And don't get too mad, I've known plenty of millennials who do this too. Anyway, the issue with this is twofold. One, if you always reach for help right away rather than trying to figure stuff out on your own, you don't actually pick up the skill that you are required to learn to help you solve the problem as quickly. You may pick it up eventually, but doing stuff on your own is a much better teacher than having it explained to you. Personally, I think this is similar to the kind of mental atrophy that some studies are showing with over-reliance on AI, where people lean purely on the answer to stuff rather than the process of getting to that answer, and their brain stops working good. The second issue with this is when you're a team lead or a manager, having an employee who's doing this constantly gets pretty frustrating after a while. We've all probably had the experience of a helpless parent asking you to fix something about their phone, which is completely fixable with a 2-second Google search, and the feeling as a manager or team lead the 8th time through explaining to somebody the hotkeys for an automatic texture setup system is pretty much the same. If the manager is good, they'll still answer you, but also encourage you to do some self-directed learning. But be aware, at some point this stuff does come up when plans for promotion or headcount reductions are being made. Your leads won't be upset with you asking questions, but asking the same basic stuff that could be easily answered by a Google search will definitely raise some eyebrows. Number 7, not learning secondary skills. In a similar vein to the last one, your 3D skills, no matter how good they are worthless if you don't also have the soft skills to go with them. But what do I mean by soft skills? You can break this into 3 categories. Number 1, social skills. Number 2, technical skills. And number 3, business skills. I'll put social skills into context with an anecdote. At a previous job of mine where I ended up in a technical role, I approached my manager at one point because I was learning Python on the job and software development in general on the job, and I was skeptical of my ability to meet the standards of the other very talented engineers at the company. He told me that not only was my 3D knowledge more important for that role than my Python knowledge, but that, and I quote, "We can teach any idiot to write some Python, but we can't teach them to be self-directed, curious, or pleasant to work with." Essentially, if you are an easy person to get along with, fairly hands-off, and capable of meeting your work targets on your own with not a lot of micromanaging, that can go a very long way to securing your position. That doesn't mean you can slack on technical skills, but it's just as important to be a decent and helpful coworker as it is to be a talented artist. The only exceptions to this, in my experience, are at the very peak of skill, where an engineer, more often, or a 3D artist, less often, is so good at what they do that they can afford to be abrasive or uncompromising because they know, and the management knows, that they literally cannot be replaced. So unless you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are that guy, try to play nice with your team. Technical skills seems like an obvious requirement for a 3D artist, but I'm not talking about your skills in Blender, Maya, Max, or whatever 3D package you use. I'm talking about all of the other ancillary skills that you need to be a successful artist. If you can navigate Blender but not navigate your computer's file system, you're going to be a liability to yourself as a contractor or to your lead and your team as an employee. You should at minimum know how to use all of the basic functions of your computer's operating system and file system. You should be able to independently organize and manage your working files and assets and/or organize them under direction. And you should have very solid skills with search engines that allow you to find assets, files, and anything else you might need while you're working on your 3D work. And those search engine skills need to go beyond just finding files. You also need to be able to determine if they'll work with your scene and also know the licensing structure that they use and make sure that it's not a restricted asset or license. This is an important thing to know how to do both as an employee and as a contractor, but if you're freelance, it is doubly important as a contractor because if you misuse IP in a full-time job, you could probably get fired for it. But if you do it as a contractor and you're not incorporated as an LLC, you personally can be sued for that IP theft, which is definitely not something you want to involve yourself in. And finally, business skills. Now this one seems like it would only be important as a contractor, but it's actually important as both a contractor and as an employee. What does this mean? It means you should have a full working knowledge of the tax system and various financial instruments that you'll encounter while working. I can't tell you the number of contractors who have started in 3D in the US who don't realize they're required to pay estimated taxes every quarter and end up getting a huge tax bill at the end of the year, plus a fine for not filing correctly. As a W-2 employee, in the US, your tax situation is much simpler, but your medical and benefits situation will be more complex. Many companies in the US, especially startups, also offer stock options along with traditional benefits packages, and it's critically important that you understand how these financial instruments work, along with the different risk options for exercising them, so you can maximize your own potential windfall if the company is successful and minimize the amount of taxes you're going to have to pay. Yes, it's a lot of extra work, but think of it as important things that will save you a lot of money down the line. And finally, number 8, not preparing a dry period fund. 3D, like many other entertainment industries, goes through boom and bust cycles. When work comes in, there's often a ton of it, sometimes more than you can even manage to do. Typically, when interest rates are low and advertisers can afford to borrow huge amounts of money, the work is crazy. And it's very tempting during these periods to spend like crazy and live a more wild and fun lifestyle. After all, you're making a ton of money. But, like any boom and bust industry, the booms are followed by busts. And as an artist, you need to be prepared to ride these out. Sometimes multi-year bust cycles can happen, and you will get little to no work. And if you're not ready for that, with a fund that you can tap to live on, you are going to have a very hard time and may have to leave the industry altogether. And this advice may seem like it only applies to contractors, but I actually recommend this for full-time employees as well. The work may be much more steady and measured as a full-time employee, but the entertainment industry as a whole goes through boom and bust cycles. So unless you're in something very niche and very specific that is totally bust-proof, you should probably be prepared with a rainy day fund, if not for a few months to a year, just whatever you can manage, because there will be long periods where you're hunting for a job. I think this is true of most jobs, but in entertainment, it's particularly bad. Following these 8 steps won't guarantee your career in 3D, but it will do a lot to isolate you from the easiest pitfalls that people fall into, especially when they're first getting started. So hopefully, I've helped a few of you avoid getting your career cut short, and I'd like to see you in the industry, and hopefully we'll run into each other at a job someday. I'd be curious to hear from any experienced artists that have watched this. Is there anything you think I left out of the list? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, never stop learning.